This week, we're going to be talking about micro and macro evolution. This information comes from Chapter 11 in our textbook. The outline for this week's lectures includes an introduction to evolution, then evidence for evolution, natural selection in populations, microevolution, and then finally macroevolution and speciation. Now, often when we think about evolution, a name that comes up is Charles Darwin. And what I would like to emphasize is that while he laid the foundation for a lot of our modern understanding of evolution, he definitely wasn't the first individual to have this idea or have this concept. So what are we talking about in terms of evolution? Well, we know while reproduction produces offspring, of a similar type to the parents, evolution is something that happens gradually over several generations. Evolution doesn't happen over an individual's lifespan, but instead it impacts a population. That all life has evolved and diversified from a common ancestor is one of the foundational concepts of biology. Charles Darwin was integral in our modern understanding of evolution, but he wasn't the first one to think about these concepts. When we look at pre-Darwinian concepts of evolution, we can look back in Greek philosophy. Now, Plato argued for static or unchanging species, but several other Greek philosophers at the same time presented these evolutionary ideas of transition between organisms. As scientific research continued and we started to discover things such as species extinction, and increased geologic timescales of the age of the Earth, these were both being discovered before Charles Darwin's contribution to the field of biology. In fact, there's another early evolutionist named Lamarck who presented this concept of inheritance of acquired characteristics. However, his theory did end up being disproven. He was suggesting that the changes that an individual organism experienced over their life, that somehow that information was transmitted to the offspring. But we find out that's not exactly how genetics works here. So who was Charles Darwin, though? Charles Darwin, he was a naturalist. He worked on a boat, the HMS Beagle. And he traveled the world on this research vessel from 1881 through 1886. During this trip, he visited South America, Australia, and Africa. And in these locations, he noticed similarities and differences between the animals. He especially noticed on islands separated from the main continental landmass. Often there were animals similar to what you would find on the mainland, but varied or changed in certain ways. After his observations were complete and he returned home, he was pondering this relationship between the animals on islands, comparing them to the animals on the local mainland. And he ended up coming up with a few different observations that ultimately led to his theory. Some of these observations include that characteristics are inherited or passed from parents to offspring. And again, this wasn't a novel observation, but something that was foundational for the ultimate development of his theory. Next, that when animals reproduced, more offspring are produced than can survive. Meaning there's always going to be a competition for resources. Whether it's food, whether it's space, whether it's safety, there's always competition. And lastly, that there are variations between offspring within a population. So not all the individuals in a population will be exactly the same. These observations led him to develop his hypothesis, which later became a theory through testing, called descent with modification. So these observations on the previous slide, they will lead to changes in future generations because those best adapted to their environment will produce more offspring, make a bigger contribution to the population in future generations, genetically speaking. They'll have more kids. Their genes will make up a larger portion of that future population. This is known as natural selection. Natural selection is the differential reproductive success, and the result of change in the population is now called descent with modification by means of natural selection. In our next video, we'll be talking about the evidence for evolution.